Nope.
The harder we work doesn't necessarily relate to the more output. In fact, sometimes it's the other way
I
around.
think those are the two most important values in a capitalistic culture.
It's not about the amount of time I take, it's about the path that I take to get there.
The harder I rest, the further I go.
Where the mind goes.
Okay.
It only took us 2.5 hours to get ready to actually record.
But it was cool to see you in action.
Was
it? I've never actually
You
seen
actually haven't, no.
Production Jensen before.
It's different, isn't it?
Production Jensen is a little bossy, but I kind of like it.
I feel like my most masculine personality comes out when I'm in production mode, where it's like, no, sit there, move.
Yep, move, turn your head, stop talking. Can I
Please.
interrupt you right now?
Yep.
Even then, though, you're polite. Can I interrupt you for a second? You just did. Go ahead.
You've already interrupted
Can I ask you
me.
a question? Another one?
No, it's real. It's funny because I think that part of my personality is actually my default personality.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was younger, I trained it out of myself, as I was told I was too bossy, a lot, maybe too many times. And then when I started to do film, I started to realize, like, if I do not do this, we will not be successful. Mm-hmm. I have to learn to be directive on set, and I had to relearn that muscle, and I'm still learning.
But I think the difference between someone being bossy and someone commanding a room and delegating is in the delivery of it. It's not, hey, go do this. It's kind of like we've talked about this before, but in order to have like a good team, you have to have a baseline of understanding that everyone's on the same page. Everyone's on the same team. We have one goal. And if we have one goal, then I should be able to tell you in maybe a bit of a matter-of-fact way, hey, I need you to do this. Let's go do this, right? It's how we both go achieve our goal.
Totally.
And I think that's when it comes to like effective delegation and when you're a leader and as a director of production, you're a leader, you have to be able to go do this. And you don't have to say please, but the understanding is that please is there and thank you is there. But we don't have time to go with all the formalities.
No. And I think one thing too, and part of why I'm starting to work with my new business partner, Romeo, is we've built trust, I think, on set, where we can both do that to each other because we have different spheres of expertise. And so I know when we're talking about a specific topic, he's the one who's like, move there. And I'm like, dope. I'm not, you know what I mean? But we hadn't talked through all that. So, hopefully you weren't too offended by me being move.
I loved it. In fact, I told you as we were doing this, like, please boss me around, tell me what to do. Because I also have been on the other side of it where I'm like, look, hopefully you have this understanding that I'm going to be a little bossy here, but it's in the effort that we both get what we need to get
100%.
done. Right. Yeah. I think we have a bit of that as well, where we've now been able to say, hey, I disagree with you and here's why, and not have to be like, hey, are you okay if and even sometimes we still have those formalities, but at this point in our relationship, I feel like we're pretty good at going, I disagree and here's why, and I don't have to worry about you being offended, or you don't have to worry about me taking something the wrong way because we're very clear on our mutual goals. Right?
100%.
So I have a question for you, buddy. How would you define hustle culture?
Oof. Oh. Hustle culture to me is an outgrowth of the dysfunctions of capitalism.
Say more.
You're like, whoa.
Did not expect you to go there, but keep going.
I think capitalism as a metastructure has intentionally formed our economy into one that prioritizes productivity and efficiency over all other things. I think those are the two most important values in a capitalistic culture. And I'm talking in an extreme, in a purely capitalistic culture. Everything else, to me, goes to the wayside to productivity and efficiency, right? And I think in the United States, we have supported, prioritized, and benefited and harmed because of capitalism. And I think hustle culture is the individual value system that has grown out of prioritizing efficiency and productivity against all other things. Right? So if you are hustling, you are ignoring self-care, you are ignoring potentially personal relationships, you are ignoring rest, right? You're ignoring all of these other things, and we label them other names. We label them as lazy. We label them as, not trying hard enough, quitting. We apply all these other value systems to taking a break because hustle culture values productivity and efficiency over everything else.
Did not expect you to go there, but it actually got me going down a rabbit hole that I didn't expect. And it actually goes back to, probably the 50s and 60s and the Industrial Revolution, where businesses were incentivized and created around this idea of output per time, right? Or output overtime. And even down to how people were brought on and hired and jobs were created was all about being a cog in the machine and being able to operate as quickly and efficiently as possible. Output, right? Prioritizing for output. And in general, and at a very high level, that's what hustle culture is, right? It's optimizing for output over everything else. The idea of hustling and this idea of hustle culture really has derived from this idea that if I can always find a way to be as efficient with my time, but more importantly, in maximizing that efficiency, then I'll be able to output more, and therefore I will get farther in my endeavor, whether that's making more money, whether that's building a business, whether that's creating a project, right? I don't think it can be directed just to a business level. There's a creative context to hustle culture as well. That I think is something that could be talked about as well. But at the end of the day, I think you're right. It really just comes down to maximizing efficiency. But then there's this level on top of it that I think makes hustle culture, at least the perception of it, more toxic, which is it's at the expense of our personal health.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why I am pretty strongly anti-hustle culture as a person. Yeah. Deeply anti-hustle culture. Now, if you really just get into the core of what does the word hustle mean, I might get on board. I like the idea of being productive. I'm somebody who spends a lot of time optimizing my time in my day and how do I approach motivation and how do I, get the most out of the time I am working. And someone might look at that and say that's the hustle. Mm-hmm. But to me, why I say I'm anti-hustle culture is I have gotten even deeper into the idea of productivity and efficiency so that I can still be effective and run a business without taking away from rest, without taking away from taking a break and having a long lunch. I have many days where I only maybe work 4 to 6 hours a day. But I think because I rest and take breaks and, being a burnout coach, I'm thinking a lot about how do I live my values that I'm also sharing with my clients. I find that I have just gotten way more effective in the time I am focused and working. I reflect a lot on when I worked a traditional 9 to 5 and in the 9 to 5 culture, if you work for an organization, most organizations care about button seat time, right? That's why we have this entire, anti-remote work movement going on right now where people are like, well, our employees, we need mouse wigglers to be able to track if my employee is working. And I think people are just missing the point, which is that you should be caring about the outcomes, right? Like, is that person, getting the outcomes that you want out of that role? And if they are, and they're doing it in half the time somebody else would, who gives a shit, right? But we lose sight of that because, in my opinion, we're connected to this idea that we need to maximize every inch and hour and minute out of people's lives, including on ourselves.
So as a business owner and a burnout coach, how do you balance the two? How do you balance this idea that I need to be productive and I need to be working or else I'm not going to make money, with this understanding that if I only optimize for that, I'm going to burn out, I'm going to suffer, and I won't be able to make money? How do you balance those?
Yeah, totally. I think where I have moved, and it's always an evolving thing for me. I'm inherently a creative person. I am never done. I've not figured it out. I will always be tinkering. I often think of myself almost like as an inventor of my own life and lifestyle because I'm always like trying new pieces and trying different stuff. And I would say where I'm at now is I set quarterly goals I set annual goals. I never go farther than annual goals because the world changes and evolves and your business changes and evolves too quickly, in my opinion, for anything more than a year out. But then I set quarterly goals underneath that, and then I'll often set weekly and then daily goals. And to me, the big difference and the leverage point to not burning out but still, achieving the things you want to achieve is you let go of getting your to-do list done every single day. I used to beat myself up just so much if I got to the end of the day and I didn't finish my goals. Now I place a lot more emphasis on getting to the end of the week and looking back and going like, maybe I didn't get everything done on my to-do list for the week, but were the essentials done? And if the essentials aren't done, then I might go, okay, I need to work a little bit longer today on a Friday, right? But often I go, actually, the essentials are done. And there's a lot of little things, that we're terrible judges of how much time it takes us to do things. So I'll set, 6 things on my to-do list sometimes and get to the end of the day and I've done 2, and I'm frustrated. But if I just let go and I get to the next day, all of a sudden I'll find that for whatever reason that day I'm so productive and I just blow through 8 things instead of 6 that I thought I was going to get done, right? So I find that by the end of the week, I'm actually doing really good. And that starts to roll up even more when we start looking at monthly and quarterly types of outcomes, right? And I look back and I go, wow, yeah, the amount of days I actually completed my to-do list is actually quite low. But the major goals that I wanted to achieve, I've achieved every single one of them, often. And so I think if we can learn as human beings, as individuals, right, to let go of this like death grip that we have on needing to be hyper productive every single day, and we look at over longer timelines, I think that we'll find that we're actually a lot more effective than we thought because we rested, because we recharged, and that gave us more creative juice the next day, and we solved what would have taken us 90 minutes yesterday in 20 minutes.
What I'm hearing, and I don't know if I've ever thought about it this way, but it makes a lot of sense, and maybe this is a very succinct way of saying what you just said, which is on a micro level, you don't give yourself too much. But on a macro level, you have a pretty full plate and you have ambitious goals. And the balance of the two is where you can, I guess, have your cake and eat it too, which is I can have these, they call them, these big audacious goals, right? You can have these big audacious goals, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be reflected in your daily tasks, right? You can set and chunk things down to such a small level that you can have enough on your plate on a daily, weekly basis that keeps you busy, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to consistently be working. And I think this understanding of breaking things down and chunking them down, right, from those yearly goals down to those weekly and daily tasks is where hustle culture might become unnecessary. It almost as if hustle culture is the absence of effective planning down to the daily level. And it's just this, if I just keep moving, if I keep the hamster wheel turning, I'll get to where I want to go. But that's not the only path, right? You can also take a step back and be a little bit more careful with the steps you make, the path you take to get there, and you'll still get to the same place. Maybe a tortoise and a hare analogy or something along those lines.
I think that's actually the perfect metaphor, right? And I think I am quintessentially, both as an individual person, but then also how I've been socialized and, the way school socializes us in this country to be the hare, right? Is how do I get the absolute most out of myself in every single moment? I've been reflecting a lot on this as a metaphor, which is I'm wanting to do a half marathon sometime next year, probably in the spring. And so I hadn't been running in a long time. I have decent cardio as a human being. And I got back and was going to do a 6-mile run the other day. And I had been timing myself for the last few months and my average pace. And so I was like, I'm going to push myself today. And so I set my goal to be at about 8.5 miles or 8.5 minutes per mile as my split. And I did it for the first 2 miles. And I was feeling good. And then something happened at the end of that 3rd mile and I just was gassed. And suddenly I was getting up to 14 to 16 minutes per mile till by the time I got to the end, I had to walk, which normally I never have to do on a 6-mile run. And so I've been reflecting a lot on that as, again, that default programming of like, I'm trying to get every bit of juice out of myself. Versus when I've reflected on other times that I've run a 6-mile run, which normally I can do pretty easily, and I'll maybe do it at 10 minutes per mile, I get to the end and I feel pretty good. And honestly, I haven't looked at this, but I bet you the amount of time total for that 6 miles is either the same or worse from the time when I ran harder.
God, I'm going to forget who said this. It was on a podcast. I've heard it multiple times. I'm going to put out 2 names. I don't think it was either one of them. It was either Seth Godin, or let's say it was Seth Godin. I don't remember. Some marketer who talked about this. And it doesn't even matter who. What you're saying, it directly relates to what they said, which was they had this 2-mile run down the beach that they would do almost every single day. And they had a goal that they had to get it done in under 24 minutes as quick as possible, like always trying to beat their time. And it was around 22 to 24 minutes every single time. And they would do it, and they would always maybe shave off a second, maybe, right? But one day they were like, you know what, let's just take it leisurely, and let's actually just enjoy it, and let's be present with it, and let's listen to the waves, and let's look at the people, and let's just make this an enjoyable run and get back and see what time. And it was like 24 minutes and 12 seconds. The point being is that all of this work, all this effort to go as fast and hard as you can, maybe shaved off 12 to 15 seconds of their 24-minute run. It wasn't much, right? And I think there's a powerful metaphor there, which is the harder we work doesn't necessarily relate to the more output. In fact, sometimes it's the other way around. And I've noticed this in my life so often where I beat myself up sometimes. Why can't I just work harder? Why can't I just grind and get things done? And I've realized for me, it's not about the amount of time I take. It's about the path that I take to get there. And the path requires me to step back, do a little bit of research, and figure out, okay, where is the best route and what is the best path to get to this outcome that I want. And oftentimes at the end of the day, it's not the quickest path. It's the time where I can sit back and I can strategize and I go, oh, okay, if I spend a little bit of time here working on this thing, it'll actually save me a lot of time in the long run, but it's going to take a lot more time to get there. And I find that ends up being the most sustainable solution, because at the end of the day, most of these things that we're doing, that we're hustling to do, are things we're going to have to do again and again and again. And the more I can step back and go, okay, how can I make this easier for me? How can I hustle less so that I can hustle more in the future?
I love that. And I think the words that keep coming to me as you were talking was, the harder I rest, the further I go. I feel like, it's so counterintuitive. I think that's what's so hard when you are, an ambitious driven person, which I would put both of us easily in those camps, right? We want, in our 9-to-5 lives that we used to have, we wanted to get as far as we could and see what we're capable of, right? And now that we're running businesses, I see that same thing. And I don't think that has to go away, right? Mm-mm. I think it's just when you are trying to live a lifetime of excellence, right? I think that's something I'm trying to pursue. You've got to shift away from excellence being the place you are arriving at, right? But it's the North Star in the distance. So if you're going to pursue something that you'll never really arrive at, you can't get every little inch and piece of juice out of yourself every single day. You'll destroy yourself, which is honestly what I've done many, many times in my life. And I've gone through seasons of that. And I think the more I rest, the more my approach changes. I feel like that's what you were saying earlier, and I love that. It's that the more I rest, the smarter I get.
It reminds me of one of my favorite books I read. I read this still when I was working in corporate, but I've applied it there. I've applied it a lot, and I'm trying to apply it more to my entrepreneurial pursuits. It's this book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. Have you read that?
Heard of this. I haven't read it yet, but I've been wanting to.
So good, dude. You got to read it. It's tailored more towards the corporate person more than the entrepreneurial type, but it's definitely directly applicable. One of the core concepts, and he does such a good job of naming his books, because in the name of the book, you understand what he's talking about. It's how to get a lot done in a short amount of time and not a lot done in a long amount of time. And it's explicitly anti that. It's how to focus for a specific amount of time that allows you to maximize the time within that, or the output within that specific amount of time, so that the rest of the day, the rest of the week, the rest of your life doesn't always have to look like that. And that's something I'm really working on getting better at. As someone who has ADHD, I'm one of the things that I struggle at the most is my ability to do deep work. But I've caught glimpses of it, and I've tried to reverse engineer what about that moment or that couple hours allowed me to get so into things. And for me, what it comes down to is not thinking about all of these other things and how this task I'm doing relates to other tasks and how it might not be as important as these other things that I could be doing, and just solely focusing on one thing. And it has to be something that, quite frankly, I'm kind of excited or at least interested in. And I think that's the other part of hustle culture is I don't think hustle culture is inherently bad. I wouldn't even say I'm anti-hustle culture. I think hustle culture applied to the wrong context is what most people think of. And what I mean by that is most people apply hustle culture to the life they're already living, which most likely isn't a fulfilling life. I think people take their 9 to 5 that they don't really like, might even hate, right? And they go, ugh, the thought of even hustling for that is a nightmare. I would never even entertain that. Hustle culture is stupid. Why would I work harder on something that, I'm on salary? It's not going to pay me more. My boss doesn't, reward me like they should. It's not going to mean anything, right? I think where hustle cultures, and that was where I was for 7 years working in corporate. When I left corporate and started my own job, I realized hustle culture, as it's defined, isn't necessary, but objectively, the skill of hustling is really important. And it doesn't have to be something that's done consistently, but I mean, from a productivity and an innovation standpoint, right? You could argue that the greatest innovations, the greatest innovators in the world in America were hustlers, right? Even just going back to the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts, right? They were these hustlers. They were seen as these aggressive capitalistic people, but what they were very good at was achieving at a high level consistently over time. And in order to be successful, you'd have to have a piece of that, right? I think opportunities for financial growth come from periods of hustling. And some of the most successful rich people are those type of people who just for one reason or another can hustle all the time. One of the things that this reminds me of is a quote from Gary Vaynerchuk. Have you heard of him?
Yeah.
He's a very successful marketer. He wrote a lot of great books about marketing. And I would say he's partially responsible for the rise and pertinence of hustle culture in at least the entrepreneurial space. He has this quote, macro patience, micro speed. And I love that because I think that's where hustle culture applied appropriately should be, right? In the micro, in your day, in your hour, in the month of whatever this part of your life is, I think the ability to hustle is an important skill to long-term success, right? I think on a high level, the idea that macro patience needs to be applied to that with the understanding that, yes, I'm going to grind for this hour. I'm going to grind for today. I'm going to even grind for this entire month. But overall, at a high, long enough time frame, I need to give myself patience. I need to rest. I need to be able to juxtapose this hustle with the opposite of hustle, which it sometimes has a negative connotation, like you mentioned at the beginning, right? Rest, taking time off, being lazy. But they have to juxtapose themselves in a long enough timeline for you to get anywhere in life.
How would you define hustle? Because I think that word has so much meaning for so many people in very different ways. Even just hearing you talk, I think you associate and define hustle different than me. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, because I've already defined how I think of it. How do you think of hustling? What does that mean?
I think it's maximizing output over a specific period of time. Okay. I think it can be boiled down to that specific. I think hustle culture has a bit of a different connotation.
Okay.
The idea of hustling, I think, is a skill that needs to be learned if you're going to be successful in whatever you do.
Okay.
I think hustle culture is this idea that this skill set of hustling is the only skill set I use. It's how I live my life. It's how I become successful, is just simply hustle, hustle, hustle. That is just as detrimental as the idea that, a skill set of patience is where it's the only thing that you need to get you anywhere, right? It's a skill to have, just as hustling is, but it's not the only piece of it. And I think juxtaposing patience and hustle is where hustle culture needs to live in your life if you want to be successful at anything at a grand scale.
I can get on board with that, which is, I'll be honest, the first time I've ever said anything related to hustling is something I'm willing to be part of. But yeah, the way you've defined it, yeah, being productive over a period of time. And I almost think of the way you've described it, the words I would probably use are, deep focus, deep productive focus, right?
Yeah.
So you pick a window of time and you say, okay, I'm going to be really focused. And it's maybe connecting even to that book you said, deep work, right? So it's like, I'm committing for this period of time to be doing that. I think hustle culture maybe takes that to such a dysfunctional extreme where it says, we are going to be at that state all the time.
And it also glorifies that state.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing. It is putting hustle on a pedestal and saying, if you don't do this all the time, then you won't be successful.
And we're not designed for that, right? Like our bodies and our minds are literally not designed for that. And I think if you really want to be effective at deep work, right? This deep hustled focus, you have to rest hard. Like some of the most famous creatives in the world came up with their ideas when they were being lazy, quote unquote, right? So I was reading something about Albert Einstein where he was like, some of my best ideas came from when I was just relaxing or in the shower.
Here's one that comes to mind for me. Do you know who Matt D'Avella is?
Yeah, I love Matt
D'Avella. I mean, he basically pioneered the minimalist movement 6-8 years ago. That dude hasn't put out a YouTube video in 4 or 5 months. He had a kid like last year. He got married 2 years ago. He is a very good subject when you think of who's a person that has hustled but isn't necessarily only living in that mindset. And now he's shifted his endeavors from video production to course creation. He's taken a huge backseat in just the amount of work that he does, but it has not hindered his success at all. And I think it's very, I look to people like him and go, I want to make sure that I don't have to go through the ups and downs of burnout and everything to get there. I want to be able to look at people like that and say, that's who I want to emulate when it comes to my work. And I think the term that really stood out to me when just kind of meditating and thinking about all this was this idea of sustainable hustle. I think the use of sustainability means how can we integrate this into our life in a sustainable way, in a way that promotes work-life balance, mindfulness, intentionality, but doesn't take away from our goals and allows us to work hard at a specific target and march steadfast to that without the fear of burning out, because we know and we have practices in place that allow us to rest, to sit, to be intentional with our time. And that in and of itself is, like you said, that's the success part. That's the motivation part. And that's what I want to lean more into in my life.
Where the mind goes.